if you want to understand the ruling class, what they're doing. You can't view their actions through the prism of personal experience. They don't think like you. They don't even feel like you. These are people that make decisions about human lives the same way and with the same emotional disconnection that you do when balancing your bank account. Human life is a form of currency, and they spend it the same way you do to get the things that they want. Sometimes this is appropriate. We need people that can operate in this way to make decisions in times of war without having a mental breakdown. A general might decide that he must sacrifice tens of thousands of lives in order to save the hundreds of thousands of others, or maybe even millions. And he must be able to order these tens of thousands of soldiers to their death, knowing full well that they are being sacrificed. This is the kind of sociopathic trait that can be a good thing and has been a necessary feature of great leaders in the past. The problem is, we are now in a time where these same personality types, in addition to having no personal remorse for their actions, also face no consequences for themselves. Let me explain what I mean by that. Sociopaths might not care about others, but they care very much about themselves, and to some degree, their legacy. We are now living in a time when many of these sociopaths in the West face no consequences for their actions because they face no criticism from the press, through censorship, propaganda, and collusion. They control what the people are allowed to know about the decisions they are making and the effects those decisions are having on the lives of the people. Without an accurate picture of what's happening, as a result of these actions their leaders are taking, the leaders face no danger of being thrown out. Further exacerbating this situation is that the public in Europe, for example, has been disarmed. So even if they were to get an accurate picture of what their leaders were doing, it would now be hard for them to do anything about it. And if you add in the surveillance state that exists in Europe as well as America, it becomes even harder for any opposition to organize. Another factor that has to be taken into account, something that's enabled the ruling class to destroy their people and aids their effort to turn them into nothing more than machinery that provides their luxurious lifestyles, is the loss of religion. In the past, the people that lived in Western countries had a moral code. This moral code was maintained and transmitted to each new generation, in recent times at least, using the parables and moral codes outlined in the Bible. This moral code not only provided the people with a means to self-police their behavior in a way that required less intervention from the state, but it also set expectations for their rulers. There was an agreed-upon set of values, and if the ruling class stepped outside of these boundaries set by the only authority that existed above them, boundaries set by an omnipotent God, the people would demand justice because their rulers had violated the rules of God. Without God and with the rise of moral relativism, a theology that can be simplified to mean that morality is in the eye of the beholder and that there is no global standard of behavior. The ruling class can now justify anything that violates these antiquated standards, and the public is in no position to feel righteous indignation and has no authority over their actions. On top of that, while the ruling class in modern Western civilization has hardly been made up of religious zealots or even God-fearing people, with the complete removal of God from the equation, without replacing it with anything else, there's not even a chance that the members of the ruling class would hold themselves up to any standard of behavior or believe that there exists any authority above them. As far as they're concerned, they are God. And to many of the people they rule over, that's just as true. Without a God in their lives, they too view the state as the next best thing. It's important to understand this when examining the actions of the ruling class. They are godless sociopaths, many of them without children, who care only about fulfilling their own hedonistic desires on a timeline that doesn't extend beyond their years on this earth. As long as they can maintain their lifestyle and power during their lifetimes, that's really all that matters to them. I'd like you to use this mindset of the ruling class, this mindset that they are the top of the food chain, that there exists no authority above themselves, to examine why they would want to flood their countries with people from the third world. And not just the invasion of Europe from Muslim countries, but also the invasion of the United States and Canada from people from the third world. As I've said before, they have no reason to preserve the culture because it's not their culture. The ruling class has its own culture. The rulers in America live largely the same way that the rulers of third world countries live. You might even say that rulers of other countries live better, like in Saudi Arabia or even African countries. These dictators live better lives and have less trouble from the populations they're controlling than those of the ruling class in Western countries. And now we're getting somewhere. Now imagine you're the ruler of a people that do have a strong moral code. They do have a culture that despises corruption in their government. They do have a culture that, even if it's removed a little bit from reality, that expects a lot out of their leaders. They do have a culture, again, even if it's not anchored by reality, that tells them that their rulers are no better than they are, that they themselves as citizens can run for office and participate and be a member of the ruling class. They have a culture of gun ownership. Should the ruling class make the mistake of pushing the people too far too fast, they have a culture that tells them in these times they must violently remove the tyrannical ruling class. Many of these people, these citizens of the West, they still believe in universal values and in God. They believe there's an authority higher than the ruling class. And to the consternation of the ruling class, it also so happens that these people are the same people typically that hold on to their right to bear arms. To make matters worse, they have higher IQs on average than the people in the countries in the third world. This makes them harder to deceive, harder to keep in captivity, and harder to control. The citizens of the Western countries, in short, are historically the hardest people to oppress and rule over. So understanding all this, put yourself into the shoes of one of these members of the ruling class. What are some things you could do to improve your lifestyle? Imagine that you see these rulers of other nations and the way they live. Wouldn't you want your country to be more like theirs? Wouldn't you want to have the same freedoms that they enjoy? Wouldn't you want to secure your power as they have? The math is pretty simple. If you want to increase your power, you want to increase your wealth, you want to augment your lifestyle to more closely resemble the lifestyle of these rulers, you simply need to alter the population of your country to more closely resemble the populations of these more oppressive governments. And that is exactly what they are doing. Now, we've talked about some of these things that make the citizens of the Western countries difficult to manage, but there are several things that actually make them easy to control as well. These religious gun owners are often very sympathetic to people who have the misfortune of living under these other more oppressive regimes. They have a natural inclination to want to help these people. The ruling class simply has to exploit these feelings of compassion and tell the public that this isn't about replacing them. No. It's about helping those less fortunate. You see, another attribute of these otherwise difficult to manage citizens is their humility. They are loath to take pride or even credit for the accomplishments of their people. They judge everyone individually, which can be problematic at times for the ruling class, but it can be easily exploited when it comes to their demographic replacement plans. It's easy to convince these humble, sympathetic citizens that their culture and certainly not their genetics, have nothing to do with their success. That there is something special about the government, the state, the ruling class, or the geography that explains their prosperity. And by withholding access to this government and superior land, they are keeping their ill-gained treasure from the impoverished people around the world. You see, sociopaths, both in the micro and in the macro, are experts at using what is good about people against themselves. They play on your empathy and use it as a weakness because they see it as a weakness. That's what makes them sociopaths in the first place. They don't care about your standard of living or how much you will be forced to sacrifice it to improve the standard of living of the population they wish to have replace you, because you're not really sacrificing your lifestyle to improve the lifestyle of these less fortunate people. You're sacrificing your birthright and the future of your children so that the ruling class can improve not just their lifestyle, but also their access to power. I know this is difficult for many people to hear. Unlike the ruling class, the average person doesn't think in terms of populations because the largest number of people they have to manage are the members of their family or maybe even just a few employees. The ruling class knows this. They exploit this about people. They exploit the people that are charitable in their personal lives, people that are charitable in the micro. The people that are so eager and willing to give the poor the shirt off their back, they fail to see the consequence of this charitable act when it's applied on a massive scale. They're so convinced that there's nothing special about them, that all their prosperity is simply a consequence of being born within a certain border with a certain government, that they believe that the people within those borders are interchangeable, that the success of their countries was simply random, that they were one of the lucky ones, born in this magical, prosperous land. And they think this because for decades upon decades, the ruling class has been chipping away at the pride that these citizens have in their accomplishments or in their ancestors, all the while browbeating them with all of the negative aspects of their history. And they have eroded the culture so much, they are dangerously close to getting what they always wanted. They have created a situation where the culture and the people who value freedom and have these universal values will be easy to replace because we're rapidly approaching the time when there is no culture or people left to preserve.